All right. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, couple of intro words. So, hello and welcome everybody to Riga Power BI user group. And today we have a really special guest, Aivis from ZoomCharts. As you know, the ZoomCharts is one of like famous custom visual producers or developers for Power BI. So we see that Zoom charts actually in almost every second Power BI desktop release, and we see them. So and today we have a chance to look at some visuals from the first hand. So please, Ivis.
Yeah, thank you, Aldis, for having me as well. So if anybody has any questions, I'm a true believer of if you have a question, just go ahead and drop me in the chat or just, unmute yourself and ask something. Other than that, yeah, just a quick little bit of background so you understand why am I even here, right? What are custom visuals? How long have been there, and so forth. So the whole story about ZoomCharts is the company itself was established a little bit of 7 years ago. And the reason why we started to not only work on custom visuals themselves, but actually on visualizations in general is because we were looking for different custom solutions ourselves. And one of the things that we quickly realized is that they're lacking in one particular way, and that is the interactive or let's say intuitive kind of exploration of data. There were a lot of different visualization types, different kind of properties that you could adjust with them. But the main one that they were lacking is like truly interactive, touch-driven exploration. So that was the initial idea when we started to create our own complete, visualization library. So we created our own from scratch. And when we were showcasing our solutions during one of the conferences, actually this was in 2016 in New Orleans in Collision, we were approached by the Microsoft team, actually Power BI CAT team, and they asked us if we wanted to kind of join them into the Power BI Custom Visuals Developer Program. It sounded really interesting at the time, so we gladly accepted that. And ever since, we've been in close collaboration with them. We're trying to follow through and understand all the latest features that are coming into the Power BI and these sort of things. And, just trying to keep ourselves up to the game. Um, like I said, ever since then, we've been in close collaboration. In 2017, May 13th, I think it was, we released our first visuals within Power BI. And those were the donut visual, the time series, and the combo visuals. So we started off with 3 visuals. Now we have 8 custom visuals already available in the app stores. They have been downloaded for more than 500,000 times, and we have paying customers from 100 different countries around the world. And the customer size really varies from companies with just 10 people, from single users to I would say corporate companies like Chevron, Microsoft themselves, DHL, PayPal, these sort of companies. So it's really kind of a vast amount of different customers that we have already in the portfolio. But yeah, like the webinar and the title for it said, we're going to be focusing on certain visuals today. So I'm going to quickly transition to the report itself. Can you see it all right, Aldis? Yeah?
Yep.
All right. So before we go into the visuals themselves, there are some core principles that we like to follow when we are creating our visuals, right? One of them is, like I said in the beginning, and that's the intuitive and seamless exploration experience. So one of the things that we are true believers of is that we don't try to use any external elements. Like, for example, with the native visuals, you do know that you have that drill down button that you need to activate it, and only afterwards you can start to interact with the visuals. With our visuals, you can actually start to interact with them directly. There's no hidden combination keys, no controls, no anything like that. So for example, you can see here just a simple donut visual, and I click on USA, and it drills down to the second level of the information. Now, when I'm doing this, I'm also applying filters to the rest of the report page. All the KPIs here at the top are filtered out. Here in the table, you can see I only have results for USA, for example, and so forth. And to kind of bring this to a new level, we also wanted to have that cross-chart highlighting and filtering capability. So if you decide to, for example, use another of our visuals, like this one, for example, right here, combo visual, where I have different sales reps, I can easily click on Marta Hernandez again, drill down to the second level of the info, and you can see now both of these are being used as a combinational filter. But that's not it. We also have the time series, for example, select a certain time period. And this is the selection that you're passing through to the end user and kind of filtered out data. So that's what we really wanted to give to the users, right? We wanted them to give the possibility to sort of slice and dice through the information. And one of the things that we're trying to also reposition a little bit is that we want the companies and report developers to transition a little bit more from the traditional reporting style, where you have, you can filter out things, but the report itself looks a little bit more static. I know there are still, even large corporations who still print out their reports, which kind of seems redundant since you have Power BI in first place, but it's really what's happening. And what we're trying to do with our visuals is to transition this more to a sort of a Q&A session, right? So when you have no filters applied on the report page, you're essentially starting with an overview of the data. And then afterwards, you can start to interact with it through different dimensions. So from the time, product lines, sales reps, and these sort of things. So we're just trying to make it as easy and intuitive for you guys to explore the data. All right. So we went through these ones. So the next thing I'm going to focus on is going to be the combo visual itself. So that's. All right, here we go.
Yeah, muted. Go on.
Got it. All right, so we're going back to the combo visual. So the combo visual, like I said, was one of the first visuals that we released in. And there's a particular reason why we call it the combo visual. So if we look closely here on the fields list, you can see that we have only two type of fields available. That's the category field, and then we have the series field. Now, one thing that you're going to notice here, especially for those of you who are more familiar with the native visuals, is that we do not have a legends field. So we don't have a field that quickly splits one series into multiple subcategories, right? And there's a particular reason for that. One of the things that we are trying to focus on with our visuals is customizability. And when it comes to customizations and certain formatting options, we're willing to sacrifice some of the functionality to bring in new kind of capabilities for visualizations. So one thing that does happen with our visuals is in certain cases, you do have to do a little bit more data manipulation or creating new columns and these sort of things. But when it comes to customization, the native visuals, they just don't have these capabilities. So to set up the combo visual, it's pretty simple, right? So in the category field, we add our categories where we define also our drill downs and the hierarchy for the data. So for example, we can drag in something like, let's go for product line. Second level is going to be sales rep. And then I'm going to add two series. So in the series, I'm going to go for total sales and profit. And by default, you can see that I have two columns now. Each of them is in a separate column. Each of them represents a separate series, right? Just as a scratch, it doesn't really look that impressive, right? We can do this with the native visuals as well. Sure, but where it differs is when you go into the formatting options, you can see that for each of the series, you actually have a separate formatting tab. So you have this option to individually customize every single series that you have within the visual. And with the 1.6 version, which should be available within the app stores today or tomorrow, you're going to have 25 different series. And what you can do with them is pretty amazing. So you can adjust the display names. You can choose whether the series itself is a column, line, or an area. And this is where you can see why we call it the combo visual, right? We have 25 different series. You have 3 different chart types. So you can see that you can create multiple lines, areas, columns, and so forth. So this is where you already start to kind of, I would say, emerge into the combination kind of complex that the visual has. With the combo visual right now, kind of sort of the options that we have already created is that the visual is capable of creating more than 100 different variations from this one single visual. So for the columns, lines, and areas, of course, you do have separate kind of formatting options. You can adjust the colors, the outlines, the markers for the outlines, the opacity levels, outline width, smoothing effects if necessary, but that's not really it, right? What else we can do here is we can make both of these series back to columns. And if I scroll down a little bit more, you can see that we also have this possibility to stack and cluster these visuals. So right now, what I'm going to do is just create a stacked column chart. In order to do that, each of the series has their own respective stack number. So what I mean by that is series 1 is going to be stack 1, series 2 is going to be stack 2, and so forth. So since I know I'm using series 1 right now, I'm just going to choose stack 2, and there you go. This is how you create a stacked column chart. If you add in more series, you can create multiple stacks. You can even start to cluster them. So this is even more capabilities and more kind of options on what you can create from this one single visual, right? So once we stack them, this is not where we stop. We can go up in the settings, and here we even have different stacking settings. So we can go for normal stacks. This is where you just physically place one value on top of another. Then we have the 100% proportional stack. One thing that you can notice right here is that by default, it doesn't revert automatically to percentage values. And that's because in the primary y-axis, the default format is numerical axis. So you just need to go into the formatting options and change this to be a percentage. And that's kind of one of the great and also annoying things about having a lot of kind of, settings within the visual. It's just that not everything can be really controlled automatically. There are certain limitations to the settings that you can do with it. But on the other hand, you do have that full control and making sure that the visual looks exactly like you want it to look like. So 100% proportional stack. If we go back to it, the third option is zero-based stack. Now, with a zero-based stack, there typically is kind of one concept that flies by, or the reason why a lot of people still don't use zero-based stacks. They're really good for a certain kind of scenarios, but one of the issues that a lot kind of I come across personally a lot is that, for example, when both of these columns are the same width, it doesn't really help the user to understand whether they're stacked on top of each other or this is a zero-based stack, right? So one thing that we can quickly do as well is go into the formatting options right here, close series to open up series 2, and width percent. So we just gonna quickly adjust this one and say that the second column is gonna be 70% of the width. So just by these small adjustments, you can easily now spot the difference, right? So when we can physically see that both of these series start from the same 0 point. Even if we start to play a little bit more with the width percent, let's say the percent is gonna be 1. Let's go back to stack settings and put this on normal stack. And with a little bit of kind of creative thinking, placing the series in the correct order, in the correct positions, what we can start to do is we can even create the combo visual to look more like a candlestick visual or even a box and whiskers visual. So that's something that we're really after for, right? We want to give you one particular visual that is really customizable and has a lot of these options already available. Whereas, sure, we're not going to say that we cover like every single possible use case out there, that our visuals are the easiest to use. It's definitely not. Because of the fact that we have so many settings, it might seem a little bit of intimidating at first, right? It's kind of hard to understand what all they do, what you can do really with them, what kind of options do you have available. But once you start to get familiarized with one of them, the principle is pretty much same for the rest of the visuals. So for example, everything that I've done right here with the combo visual, which is meant for categorical data, I can apply also for the time series visual. Sure, these two visuals have certain settings that are particular to each and every one of them, but the principle remains the same, right? So in order to create the stacks, make sure you have the same stack number. Afterwards, if you want to make a cluster, you again, just make sure that they're clustered in the same order. So that really helps in those particular scenarios. One thing that we also introduced with the 1.6 version is something called no data policy. And that's something that we had actually a lot of requests about because native visuals don't really have that capability of switching between these different policies. And what it means is, let's just open up series 1. And right here, you can see we have this no data policy. So there are 3 different options: join, 0, or skip. And for this particular instance, I'm going to be using an area. So the default value here would be join, right? Let's enable series 1. You can see that what really happens is that point B from the tooltip, you can see it doesn't have any value whatsoever. So what the chart is doing is it's extending the line from point A to point C and just making more of a trend line, right? That could work in particular cases. In other cases, you don't really want to have that connected line and you want the visual to revert back to a default value or 0 value. You can easily do that as well. And then also we have this option of skipping that point. In this case, for example, you can just see the markers at point A and C. But if I would have more points on both of those sides, so the lines would extend further, but the visual would just physically skip that one point which doesn't have any data values within it. So kind of these small things is what we also try to focus on. And whenever you're using our visuals or pretty much any other visual that's out there, if there are certain cases that you are not able to cover with the native visuals or other custom visuals, don't be afraid, drop us a message saying, hey, could you guys do this or that? What we do on our side is we go through every single request that we receive and we put it in the roadmap sooner or later, right? It's not necessarily that we're going to add this with the next release or if we're going to add this indefinite, but what we do definitely do is go through every single one of them, try to understand the actual use cases for it. So if this had been requested previously, how many cases do we see for this actually right now with the current user base and so forth. So yeah, if you do have any kind of suggestions or ideas, just drop me a message. I'm going to put chat. More chat. There we go. So my email is aivis@zoomcharts.com. If you have any questions or any ideas regarding the visuals, drop me a message. I'm more than happy to go through every single one of them. All right, so we went through the stacking options and the series configuration options. Afterwards, next thing I wanted to quickly cover as well is I'm going to quickly actually delete series 2. I actually want to leave only, oh no, what I wanted to do as well is let's go for something like this. Let's go for total sales, profits, and let's go for, let's say, sales target. There we go. Series 2, I'm going to quickly revert to default to the column state. All right, and I'm also going to stack third series on top of that. So now we have 3 columns in one singular stack. And the reason why I wanted to do this is because now I'm going to enable also the value labels for each of the series. And there is one particular thing that we do for our visuals that kind of helps in certain situations. So right now you can see that each stack has 3 different values, right? We have the green part, the blue, the black part, and the red part. Now, if I hover over the column itself, in the tooltip, you can see that the values showcased there are different from the value labels. And that's because by default, what we allow the user to do is to showcase cumulative values within the stack. So what this means is that right here, we can see that the bottom part is 929,000. These 2 parts combined, so the green and the black one is 1.14 mil. If we combine all 3 of them, this is 2.09 mil. And this is just one of those cases where you can showcase information differently within the visual and in the tooltip. So for example, if we go back to this setup right here, I can disable the value labels for series 1, for series 2, leave only the cumulative value. But if a user wants to, he can hover over the column and in the tooltip, he sees the actual series specific values. So that's also something that we are able to do within our visuals. If you don't like this capability, don't worry about it. Series 3, for example, series 3 value labels, and right here you have the setting for use total stack values. And this is where you just choose whether it's true or false. If you don't want it, make it false, and it's going to showcase the series specific values. So again, just trying to figure out and provide as many customization options as possible. Right, next one is going to be the thresholds. So we're going to go for this one, leave only one series and enable thresholds. So for the thresholds, we actually done a little bit of work on top of what the regular charts can do. So the easiest threshold we can provide is just a regular threshold line. This is nothing to be kind of proud of or really excited about, but hey, we can do it if it's necessary. On the other hand, what else we do here is, for example, create a threshold area. Now, this is something a little bit already more interesting. What I can do with the threshold areas is I can set in certain values for which you can see a highlight being transparent right here. If I scroll down lower, I can change the color if it's necessary. But for this case, I'm actually going to leave it in red. But I'm going to position the threshold not to be in front of the chart, because as you can see, it's a little bit in front of the chart, so it kind of interferes with it. I can just put it in the background of it, so it doesn't interfere with the actual chart that I have there. If I go a little bit lower, I'm going to enable the second threshold. Also make this an area and make this one go from, let's say, 300,000 again up to 600,000. There we go. For this one, we're going to change the color to be on yellow, place under again, go down a little bit more, enable also third threshold, make it an area. And for this one, we're going to go and say everything that's above 600,000 is going to be in green. So if we look at the chart just like this, we can see that this doesn't really work well with columns, right? Because columns are pretty thick in normal kind of use cases, especially if the visuals themselves are relatively large. But what we can do here again is go to the series configuration options and change this to be a line. And for this line, one other thing that we're going to quickly do is add in a marker. So we're going to place these circles right here. And what these sort of thresholds or area thresholds allow you to do is not only, for example, the user can now read the actual results that he achieved in sales for particular product lines, but he can also see a bit of a context as for whether the values that they achieved were underperforming, were they, okay with the performance, or were these results more of an overachiever. So what we're trying to do is just giving you more kind of tools and flexibility to create the visuals that not only represent certain scenarios, but they tell a little bit of a story as well within them. So yeah, that's one of them. And the last thing I wanted to cover regarding the thresholds is going to be the dynamic thresholds. So
yeah, we have Aivis, we have a question in chat.
Yep, let me quickly open it up, chat. Do you face any issue with custom visuals after upgrades? Do you need to change code or visual? When you're upgrading or creating a custom visual, the Power BI doesn't really change a lot of things. One thing that you need to make sure is that you're using the latest APIs. Recently, there haven't been a lot of updates, so nothing really breaks much there. One thing that custom visual developers do always need to take into consideration is that Power BI desktop is being updated every single month, right? We all know that. Whereas Power BI report servers are updated maybe 2 tops 3 times a year. So in order to create the visuals and for them to be fully compatible, what we do on our side is we also have dedicated special versions for the report servers, because the report servers not always have available all the latest features that the desktop has, right? So that's one of those things. Let's quickly open up the chat. How long do it take to create a custom visual? How long it takes to create a custom visual depends on the complexity of the chart itself, let's say like that. We have had projects where we develop the visual and deliver it to the customer for full satisfaction, let's say a week or two, whereas other projects that we have been working on have taken us 3 to 4 months to deliver it. Once the visual is delivered, there is sort of a bridging gap that a lot of custom visual developers are annoyed with, and you can even find articles from Marco Russo or Zebra BI from almost pretty much every single decent custom visual developer is kind of annoyed with one factor. When you do create a new custom visual or you create a new version for it, we need to submit it for the app source. And there are 2 ways on how you can submit it. One way is we just submit the visual and it's available on the app source for everyone to use. And the other option is to get the visual security certified. Security certification not only emphasizes on the fact that we're not retrieving any of the data, we're not collecting any data, everything you do is just sitting there within Power BI. We don't have access to anything from you. And the other thing that it allows you to do is enables some specific functions within Power BI services. And that's, for example, emails for when you subscribe to reports. So if a visual is not certified, you're not going to be seeing that visual. You can export to PowerPoint, PDF, and these sort of things. And also offline compatibility is a question in hand. So in order to get into the app source and security certified versions, regardless of the fact that we can do an update in, let's say, a week, we need to wait for the approval process, which takes around, let's say, 2 to 3 months. And that's if I'm pretty optimistic. So that's one of the things that kind of, slows up the real process of it. But if you want to have just a regular visual within the app source, not mandatory certified, I'd say a pretty basic visual could be done in a week, maybe 2 tops. All right, let's disable the thresholds, leave this one, and we left up with the dynamic threshold. Yeah, so we're gonna go back to a threshold type line, and what we're gonna change here is the value type. So by default, it's always gonna be on constant value. But what you can also do here is choose one of the aggregations that Power BI provides us. In this case, let's just say average, right? And I know that I'm using only one series. You can see it right here, series 1. So this is my average of total sales. To make it easier for the users to actually understand what this line represents, I can enable labels and type in average of total sales. There we go. If you want, you can adjust the background colors, the position of the labels, these sort of things. Just make sure it looks nice and neat, right? And the dynamic part of the threshold comes in when you start to interact with the visual. So one of the capabilities that we're most proud of within our visuals is that you can actually move them in any single direction you want to. For this one, I'm actually going to add another category right here, which has more granular view within it. All right, let's just zoom in here in the beginning, or actually, let's do one thing here. Go to x-axis, initial unit width is going to be something like 30. There we go, or even higher. Let's go for 50. There we go. So what you can see right now, the visual kind of defaults to a certain range of data that it can take in, right? And you can see that average of total sales right now is 65.06K. And once you start to interact with the visual, so you start to move it, zoom out, zoom in, move to the left or the left, it actually starts to recalculate. And you can see that as soon as one more series marker is going to appear in the chart, the threshold is being recalculated. So this means, for example, in those cases where you do have a lot of these columns, a quick way on how you can get the full average across it is if you just zoom in multiple times so you can drag in every single column, let it go so it fits into the screen, and you can now see this is the average of total sales across all of the categories. Now, if I decide to zoom into a particular area, it's again going to recalculate it. If I move to the right or the left, so every single movement that I do with a chart is going to affect the threshold. So that's one of the things that we're really happy about that we introduced within our visuals. And this principle also works in those cases where, for example, let's go back here, where I have my product line and sales reps on the second level. So if I click on vintage cars, I'm drilling down to the sales rep level, and this is also recalculated every single time. So that's something that, I'm really excited about to have within the visuals. Another kind of use case where it's sort of a threshold, but this is the case where you have like sales results and you have different targets for different categories, right? Because the limitation with the thresholds is that a threshold is always going to be a constant line. Well, not really a constant line, but a straight line that goes throughout the visual. It doesn't change from one category to another. In those cases, one particular instance or example that I have right here is going to be, let's see if this one was it. Yeah, let's put this on a focus mode so it's easier to see. So what I've done here essentially is I only have two series within the visual itself. I have my total sales and sales target. And visually what I've done with them is the sales target is more of a box with no fill color, just the outline of it. And total sales is more of a fill color that I'm using for that target box. So when I'm combining these, you can see that it gives me a sort of a moving threshold from one category to another, right? And again, if you use this with the zoom out function, you can just drag in every single category and you can quickly find certain categories or clusters of categories that have reached their targets. Once you find something interesting, again, zoom in, find only those particular, either customers or whatever it is in your case, and just focus on them. So that's one of those things. Let's go back here to the page that we were on. Or actually, let's open up these combo variations. So as you can see here, there's just different variations of what you can do with it. Just column stacked, 0, normal, whatever, or 100% proportional, normal stacks with an outline, for example, column and multiple lines, stacked areas, and all these combinations are available within this one single visual. Now, if we go back to this one thing that we do have questions a lot of cases about is, do our visuals also support report page tooltips? because that kind of gives you another perspective or dimension that you can use. And yes, our visuals do support the report page tooltips, but regarding this, there are certain things that you need to know. So one of them is you need to open up the tooltip settings. And right now, if I hover over the series, you can see that we're using a different tooltip. That's our custom tooltip. And if you want to use the Power BI built-in tooltip, we have nothing against it. Open the tooltip settings, Power BI tooltip. There we go. So it's exactly the same as for the other visuals. And now once you have this activated, to customize it, you cannot do it through this tab right here. What you need to do is scroll down a little bit lower, and there's a separate tab for tooltip. Unfortunately, everything that goes below title, so background, lock aspect, and these things are controlled by Microsoft. So as much as we would like to combine both of these, into one singular tab, we just can't do it right now. And once you're here, same principle applies as always. Choose the type for the tooltip, whether it's default or report page. If it's report page, choose the page that you want to showcase there. So from there on, it's the same experience. Few more elements that are on the chart that we do have here is the back button and zoom out button. Back button takes you one step back in the navigation. Zoom out takes you always one step up in the hierarchy. Then we have a quick switch between linear and logarithmic scales. So with just one single click of a button, I can switch between these two models. And we also have this info button right here, which is more meant for the developers, not the end users. So this is just a quick way on where you can see the license that you're using, the version of the visual you're using, and you can access documentation, on-demand webinars, and these sort of things. One more thing that we added with the 1.6 is a reset button. So the reset button, one of the reasons why we wanted to add it is because it's really easy to kind of get lost sometimes in all the filters that you applied from the visuals. One way on how you can do this, you can create a master reset filter, kind of a bookmark that goes to a default state. But what we did on our visuals is added also that ability that if you filter out something, as soon as a filter is being passed out from the visual, you're going to get this reset button. So with just one single click, you can go back to that default state. So yeah, regarding the combo visual, that's pretty much it. We're going to transition now to the time series. If anybody has any questions, feel free to just drop them in the chat. All right, let's go here, the time series visual. So as I said, these visuals, so the combo and the time series, they are relatively similar. The main difference that they do have is the data that they're using. So the combo visual is using categorical data, whereas the time series visual uses time and date-based information. One thing that's a little bit different from the native visuals in ours is that we do not use the built-in hierarchy for the time series. And that's one of the reasons when you add date field within this one right here, make sure that you're not using the date hierarchy, but you're using just the date field itself. Reason for this is that we do have our own algorithm in the background, which runs these things and calculates everything. And there are certain limitations for the time series visual. And that's what I said. We're not here to cover every single case. We're just trying to provide something new to the Power BI. Current limitations for the time series is that it does not support DAX calculated measures. We hope to fix this with the next release, which is going to be the 1.7. Right now, what's going to happen is if you use measures within the time series, you're going to be defaulted to a daily level, which is the lowest level of the hierarchy typically within Power BI. Reason for that is that we're not able to retrieve data in a way that the visual needs it to be. So right now we're getting all the data in a row level context, whereas for our visuals to compile all the results, especially if it's a more distinctive DAX measure, it needs a matrix view. So we are working on that. We have a solution from Microsoft that they kind of suggested us to try out. So that's what we're going to do with the 1.7. But as of now, there is a limitation when it comes to DAX measures. I just want to be upfront with it, not raise any false expectations. That's one of the things. And the other thing is that the time series visual always follows a particular calendar year. And you can see it right here. So it's always going to go from the earliest date to the latest date. And it's always going to go from January till December. So if you want to use the time series visual to showcase different fiscal periods, it will not be the visual for you. For fiscal periods, since those essentially are categories, you can easily use the combo visual. So the time series visual just, follows a straightforward line when it comes to time. Now, some of the particular things that do happen within this visual is, let's say, for example, if you go into the formatting options, is this one right here. So the display units. The display units actually allow you to set in the initial display unit, and that's going to be the granularity of the data that you open up by default. Also, you can adjust this here on the chart. So if you click here, there's a drop down. And with just, simple click, you can switch between different granularities of the data without drilling down into anything specific. So this is more of a, you have this expand to next level, I think it was in the native visuals. So it sort of works like that. So that's one of the things. Now, the other thing that's also available right here is different filtering options. We're going to get back to display units in just a bit. Filtering actions, and that's going to be right here under filter trigger. So by default, what we do is we have two different filtering options. First one is only on selection, which means that even if I choose, for example, if I go to a monthly view and I drill down into, let's say, quarter of October, you can see I drill down to a smaller granularity, but the KPIs didn't get filtered out. Even if I choose November now, I'm going down into smaller granularity, but I'm not passing out any filters. If I want to filter out anything, I need to hover over the x-axis, and you can see when you're on the x-axis that the cursor changes its image. So when you have this one, hold down the left control, sorry, not control, the left mouse button, and just drag a custom period that you want to select and pass this out as a selection. So it's just really simple and intuitive. Whereas there's also another option right here, and that's going to be any action. So if I go for this one, now anything that I do with the chart, whether it's manually zoom in, bring it to the right or the left, click on one of the time periods or whatever, it's going to work as a filter. So for example, if I click on November, you can see I drill down to a smaller granularity and the KPI is adjusted. If I go into one particular week again, the KPIs are going to be adjusted. If I move to the right, for example, just bring in few previous days, that's also going to be used as a filter. So whenever you're creating reports with our visuals, make sure, and all this can probably, kind of vouch for this as well. When you're creating reports, do communicate with the actual end users. See what makes sense for them, what is more kind of easier to use, more intuitive to use. Because it doesn't make any sense to create a report which you understand, but the actual user doesn't understand how it's supposed to be used, what it represents, or what to do with it. So yeah, that's one of the things. And regarding the time units, when I said we're going to get back to it, so display units that we do support right now is we support hierarchies down to milliseconds, and we can go up to different decades even. All these time periods are custom built from our side. So in your case, if there is anything in particular that you would like to explore, I don't know, for example, in your company, you have a time period of 45 minutes that you usually try to aggregate things by. We can create these time periods. It's not a problem. It's just that adding every single option that is out there, is physically impossible. You would have one drop down right here, which would go endlessly down, right? So if there are enough requests or, a justified request to add a certain time period, sure, we don't have any problems with that. We can add it with the next release. And just by enabling and disabling these time periods, you're pretty much defining the hierarchy. So for example, a quick example of this would be, let's go here to a monthly view, right? And let's choose, let's say October and November. So I highlighted these 2 months. You can see that the tooltip showcases a collective summed up value. It showcases me the time period that I selected, so October to November. In brackets, we see the actual time period, so 2 months. And if you click on this selection, you're actually going to zoom in only into that particular selection that you made. Sure, in this case, you can see that we actually have a little bit of from previous month and the one upcoming. And that's because we're on weekly granularity now. And as we know, weeks can be divided into 2 separate months, right? In order to avoid this, let's go back to a monthly view. And here in the display units tab where we had it, disable week. So we don't have that level of the hierarchy anymore. And I'm going to choose again the same ones, October, November. Click on the selection. And now you can see, that I zoomed in into those 2 months on daily basis, and I have nothing else on the visual right there. So it's just one of those things that we allow the user to do, to kind of transition between time periods, choose custom time periods that you want to explore, and just give you a little bit more flexibility when it comes to these sort of things. All right. For the time series visual, there is one more certain thing that it's a love and hate relationship, I would say, about it, but it's still there, and that's the holiday highlights. So if we zoom in closer to on a daily basis for one particular month, we can see that there are certain days which have a bit of a background for them. And these days are Saturdays and Sundays. So if you have certain values, that you're trying to kind of follow through and understand what happens during the weekend, we have a special capability or formatting option that allows you to highlight these days, to either emit them from the visual or do whatever you want with them. Or if you don't want to have this highlight, again, we have and we offer you that flexibility. Just turn them off and we have nothing against it. The time series and the combo visual also supports something I forgot to mention previously, dual y-axis. So for example, right here, I'm going to have the red line. Let's quickly go a little bit lower, say that this is going to be on the secondary axis. And in the formatting options, we can actually enable the secondary axis. So you can have certain series be on primary axis and certain series on secondary axis. Which again kind of creates new flexibilities, new kind of customization options that you do have for them. For each of the axes, you can define which side it belongs to, left or right. If you want to, you can have both axes on the same side. Might seem weird, but there are certain cases where this works. So you can put this in every side you want to, adjust the font colors, font families, provide a certain title if it's not necessary, right here next to the axis, the sizes, the font style, so regular, bold, italic, these sort of things. And another thing that we do offer is different properties for the zero line. So visible means that the value axis is always going to start with a zero value. Then we also have option of center, which is self-explanatory. It puts the visual right in the axis itself. You can see it puts it in the middle. So up and down, you have kind of same value ranges. And the third option is floating. Now, floating is something that you can play around a little bit in certain scenarios. And floating was introduced with one particular use case, and that's where you have values, let's say, that go from 5 to 10. So you allow the chart to understand the minimum and maximum value that you do have, and that value is going to be the lowest and the highest point in the y-axis. So to kind of give a little bit of a more dynamic approach for it. So we can go for that. If we go and set this back to be visible, we can go down a little bit lower, adjust the display units for the values if it's necessary. For example, I can say that these are going to be, let's say, no aggregation whatsoever. The value decimals, for some reason, I want 9 decimal numbers. And one of the greatest things about these settings right here, so display units, value decimals, and in certain cases also percentage decimals, is that these settings are per visual basis. And what I mean by it is if you're adjusting these settings right here, so for example, you adjust how the values look right here, you're not affecting your default data model. Because as you know, for example, if I click on this series, I can also choose a default format for it through this tab right here. But by adjusting these values, I'm not affecting it. It's essentially providing a different format within that particular visual. So that goes for that. We can also define what are the minimum steps for the y-axis itself. So for example, I don't know, let's say that it's going to be 20,000 now. There you go. We can also enable custom value ranges. So we can define what's going to be the minimum and the maximum value, enable or disable grid lines, and these sort of things. How are we actually on time? We do have enough time, right, Aldis? We need to finish up at around 7, right?
Yeah, it would be good.
All right, yeah. So we went through the combo and the time series. So the last visual that was mentioned we're going to go through is going to be the waterfall visual. And for the waterfall visual, there are certain things that we try to kind of play around a little bit more to provide new capabilities, right? So one of them is we allow within the visual, we do have the same approach of drill down. So if you have a category and a subcategory, Just by clicking on one of the changes, it drills down and it provides you a split of those values and a subtotal. And the other thing that we added is also a field called sequence. So when you are working with waterfall visuals, there are certain scenarios where it's really important for you to define where exactly each of the columns is going to be located. And you can do this with our visuals with the sequence field. So for example, if I drag in the sequence field right now, you can see that there are actually a couple of phantom columns. We have columns, we have the names for them, but they don't have any physical values. And that's because if we go to the data model, data view, we can see that there are actually a few columns that don't have any values. And the reason why I still have a sequence for them is because I want them to be calculated dynamically. So if I go into the formatting options, and if I go to column settings, I have this option right here, subtotal mode. If I choose this to be on all, you can see that I now have the positive changes, negative changes, and totals and subtotals. And these ones are going to calculated on the fly. So whatever value you have there, the visual is just going to calculate it properly. Of course, you cannot, click on them and drill down because there physically is nothing beneath them. So it's a synthetically created column. But you have this ability to do this. And if we go back to the fields list, like I said, the sequence field itself is just a sort of an index column where you provide a specific number for each of the columns. So if I go back here and choose a different sequence right here, it kind of looks that I just created a completely different visual. Whereas in reality, I'm using exactly the same data. I'm just positioning it differently. So that's one of the things. And in order to customize any of the positive, negative, or total columns, we do have separate tabs for them. So right here, you can see positive change configuration and value label configuration, and same for the total and the negative. So there's just a lot of kind of flexibility and unique looking cases that you can create with this visual. All right. Yeah, I think that those are the main things that I wanted to cover. If there's anything in particular that you guys think that I, maybe didn't cover, or you have some unanswered questions, or I didn't explain something clearly enough, just let me know and I'm more than happy to go through the questions and answer them.
Yeah, thank you, Aivis. Let's go to questions, suggestions, maybe
Questions,
short.
suggestions,
Yeah,
criticism. I'm open to anything.
short question from my side.
Sure.
Approximately, how long is your backlog?
That's a funny one. Right now in the backlog, we have around 380 more features to be developed.
Oh, impressive, impressive.
But the backlog is kind of still a dynamic thing because, for example, we have certain features that we want to develop for 1.7, and that's based on the current APIs that Microsoft provides us. If we see that something new comes out from their side, something that we really wanted to have for a long time and it's been requested for a while, we are always willing to adjust the timeline. It's one thing that we do not change in these scenarios is some of the core features, that we already promised to somebody. If it's promised, we're going to deliver on that. If it's something that we wanted to introduce from our side, well, those things are variables, which is why on 6th of August, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to have also a meetup about the network and the graph. And the reason why I wanted to have that is because for the version 1.6, which is the one that we just submitted to the app stores, one of the main focuses was the graph visual. And we're bringing a lot more new features to the table that Power BI didn't have previously when it comes to graph visualizations.
Great, great. Yeah, I like it. I like this ZoomChart visuals where you could put several lines and several charts in one chart. So it's really needed.
Yeah, and it's like I said, we're not trying to kind of say that we're better than every single variation that the native visuals have. No, they do still have their place in time. It's just that we're focusing on something slightly different. We're trying to provide something that native visuals don't provide instead of trying to compete with what they're already doing pretty amazingly.
Yeah, right.
Whilst we're waiting for actually some more questions, one more thing that I could do is I could showcase to you guys some of the visuals that we are working on. So 2 visuals that we are working on right now, well, in reality, we're working on 3 more visuals right now. So 3 separate teams. And one of the visuals that we're working on is going to be called the multiple time series. And another version of the time series is going to be called the legend time series. So I'm just going to add both of them and showcase the difference and some of the new capabilities that we're going to be introducing with them. Oh, I think I already had it. Yep, I had it right here. So let's make it like this. So this is going to be the multiple time series. And for multiple time series, the setup is really similar to regular time series. As you can see, we have our date field, we have our values, but there are certain fields. In this case, the field names probably will not make any sense for you guys, or will just be confusing. And that's because this visual was built as a custom project for one of our customers. So it still needs to be, let's call it generalized, right? We need to make sure that the settings and all the names that we use actually make sense to users. So I'm gonna have these 2 columns right here. Or actually, let's go for something like sales target, yeah. There we go. And what you can see here is that we have a date and legends field. So it's kind of a combined field for 2 values. And what I can do within this is I can add in another category to split the values by. But instead of doing the same thing as what Microsoft is doing, so with the regular legends field, you know, it splits up a series into multiple entities, right? We can actually just create it side-by-side comparison. Let's go here. Let's go here. Let's go for a timeline, for example. We have these values, and we're going to be splitting it by region. Come on. No, don't want to work like that. All right, we can add this like this. Oh, we only can have one. Yeah, I forgot about that. So for example, what you can see that happened here is we split the total sales series for 3 different regions, right? And we have all these 3 lines right here. What we do with the multiple time series visual is we allow you to plot multiple series, but instead of splitting them into one single visual, we're actually creating multiple instances of the time series. So for example, right here, you can see this is the NA time series, sales results and target. If we scroll over, here's the EMEA region, and here's also the APAC region. So we're in reality, we're just creating multiple instances within one single time series visual. Now, the reason for this is because it gives you more flexibility if you want to compare multiple kind of KPIs, but for specific regions. That's one of the things. And the other one is it's a lot easier for this visual. For example, if I choose a particular timeline, this selection is going to be used for all the visuals. If I want to drill down into those kind of 3 quarters that I had there, the drill down is going to happen for all 3 visuals simultaneously. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility and a few more new use cases that haven't been able to kind of achieve previously within Power BI. And the other thing that we are working on is something we call the Legends time series. So if we go here, now this one is going to be something a little bit more similar to what the native visuals do, but with a little bit of a twist. So let's go back here. Let's go for, okay, sure, pop up there, makes sense. Let's go for that. Let's go for series. There we go. And what we're gonna do here, so right here you can see we have one particular timeline, right? And in this case, I'm also gonna add region, but in this, it's gonna split up the series. So it's kind of similar to what the native visuals do, but the twist that I said is happening right here. So what we're doing for this visual is we're allowing to use different y-axis scales for different regions. And this is particularly useful for those cases where you do have metrics and you want to understand their trends, but the values themselves have really big differences, right? So for example, one series can go from 100 to 100K, another series can go from 1 to 10, then there's something that goes from 10 to 200 or something like that. But in order to understand their actual impact on each other, you need to kind of readjust the y-axis. So what's really happening here is we're creating virtual axes for each of the regions. But if it's not what you want to have, we also do allow, of course, you the option to use a single y-axis. So you can see just how the lines actually change if we're using one singular axis or if we're creating multiple axes. So this is also something that we're working on. And for this one, you can also choose, for example, which of the axes is the primary one and these sort of things. So there is a lot more kind of, cooking in the background that we're constantly working on, but it's just to bring everything that's possible with our JavaScript library into the Power BI. It's not that simple. We do still have certain restrictions from the Power BI side that doesn't allow us to bring certain features, certain capabilities into our visuals within the platform.
Yeah, but still looks very impressive.
So yeah, these things, by the end of the year, we also hope to release a scatter and a bubble chart. And a visual that we are working on right now is going to be a map visual to kind of provide you with a little bit of context as to how that's going to look like. Let's just see right here, quickly open up. Let's use this one. So this demo is not built with our Power BI. This is built with our JavaScript, but it's the concept that we're trying to bring to the Power BI, right? So what you can see here, for now, let's just ignore everything that around it and focus on the map itself. So what you can see on the map is we have these donuts. The donuts in reality are actually proximity based. So if you decide to zoom into USA, for example, you can see that the closer you get to a certain specific location, the more detailed information you get on top of your donuts, right? So the closer I get, the more split information I see now. If I quickly clear all the filters, the other capability that we're trying to introduce for the maps is bringing in a network on top of a graph, sorry, on top of a map. So for example, if I choose reseller right here, you can see this plots a network on top of the map connecting on one reseller to all his customers. And the same principle applies. The closer I get, the more split information do I get from it. So this is just kind of a brief glimpse of what's really capable of with the JavaScript library.
Great. Okay, Aivis, I think I will say you thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. One more thing that I'm going to do is after this all finishes, I'm going to send an email to you all this as well with all the sample files so you can distribute them to everyone who attended as well so they can just play around with the visuals, see how they work and everything.
Great, great.
All right,
And
everyone.
we will have you soon again with next portion of visuals, with network visuals.
Yeah.
Yeah, in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks. So stay tuned. And thank you for coming.
Yep.
And
Thanks for
have a
having me.
nice evening. Bye.